My daughter called on a Tuesday. Not a special Tuesday, not a holiday, not even a day I would have remembered if it weren't for what she said. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee cup I'd used twice that morning because I forgot I'd already washed it. That's what 67 does to you sometimes. Not forgetfulness exactly, just a kind of quiet repetition, like your hands know the motions better than your mind does. "Mom," she said, and I could already hear the rehearsal in her voice, that careful, measured tone Karen uses when she's about to say something she knows I won't like. "So, Thanksgiving this year, we've been talking, and we think it makes sense to do it at David's parents' place. They've got the bigger dining room, and his mom's been wanting to host for a while. You understand, right?" I turned off the faucet. The water dripped twice, then stopped. "Of course," I said. "That sounds lovely." "Great," she said, and I could hear the relief flooding through the phone like a dam breaking. "I knew you'd get it. You're always so easygoing about these things." She hung up shortly after, something about picking up Lily from soccer practice and Sam needing new cleats. The usual beautiful chaos of raising children that I remembered so well and missed so deeply. I set the phone on the counter and looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I roasted my first Thanksgiving turkey in 1984, the year Karen was born. The same kitchen where my husband Richard carved every bird for 31 consecutive years, never once complaining, even the year he had pneumonia and could barely stand. The same kitchen that still smelled faintly of sage and rosemary every November because the walls had absorbed decades of gratitude. Richard passed 6 years ago. Heart attack, quick and merciless, in the garden he loved more than almost anything. They said he probably didn't suffer. I've never been sure if that was true or just something people say to the wives left standing in empty kitchens. After he died, I kept every tradition alive. Every single one. The cranberry sauce from scratch, never canned. The sweet potato casserole with the marshmallow top that Sam would pick off and eat before dinner. The handwritten place cards with little turkey drawings that Lily said were embarrassing but secretly kept in her desk drawer. I knew because she told me once, whispering, like it was a confession. I did it because I believed traditions were the thread that held families together after the needle was gone. Richard was the needle, I was the thread. And I kept sewing, but this was the 4th year in a row I'd been rerouted. The first year, Karen said David's parents were getting older, and it meant a lot to them. I understood. The second year, she said they were renovating and wanted to christen the new kitchen. I brought a pie. The third year, she simply said, "We're doing it at their place again. Hope that's okay." No explanation needed, apparently. And now, the fourth. I opened the cupboard above the stove where I kept my good china. 42 years old, white with a thin gold rim, a wedding gift from Richard's mother. I hadn't used it in 3 Thanksgivings. I touched the edge of one plate and pulled my hand back. Something was shifting inside me, and I wasn't ready to name it yet. The week before Thanksgiving, I did what I always did. I went to the grocery store with a list. Turkey, 12 pounds. Cranberries, fresh. Butter, 4 sticks. Sage, thyme, rosemary. Brown sugar for the sweet potatoes. Heavy cream for the pie. I moved through the aisles like muscle memory, my cart filling with the ingredients of a meal for 8, even though I would be eating alone. The cashier was a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dana. She looked at my cart and smiled. "Big Thanksgiving plans?" "Family tradition," I said, and left it at that. In the parking lot, loading bags into my trunk, I stopped. I stared at the 12-pound turkey wrapped in plastic and thought about how absurd it was. 12 pounds of bird for one woman in a house with 4 empty bedrooms. I almost laughed. Almost. At home, I unpacked everything and lined it on the counter. Then I sat at the kitchen table and looked at it all, arranged like evidence of something I wasn't willing to admit. I thought about calling Karen, asking if maybe I could drive over, just for dessert, just for an hour. But I already knew how that conversation would go. She'd say, "Of course, Mom, you're always welcome." And then I'd show up and find myself sitting on the edge of their living room, while David's mother, Patricia, held court at the head of the table. Patricia, who once told me at a birthday party that my green bean casserole was very retro. Patricia, who redecorated Karen's guest room in lavender and gray and filled it with throw pillows that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. Patricia, who never once asked me how I was doing after Richard died. No, I wouldn't call. Instead, I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the old photo album, the one with the cracked leather cover that Richard gave me for our 10th anniversary. I flipped through it slowly. Thanksgiving 1991. Karen, 7 years old, wearing a construction paper headband with feathers, grinning so wide you could see the gap where her front tooth used to be. Thanksgiving 1998. Richard and Karen, laughing over a collapsed pie that slid off the counter. Thanksgiving 2005. Karen's first year bringing David home, both of them nervous and polite, Richard shaking David's hand a beat too long. And in every photo, there I was, apron on, serving spoon in hand, caught mid-motion between the kitchen and the dining room. Always carrying something, always in the background. I closed the album. The thing about giving is that you don't notice when it becomes invisible. You keep filling plates, writing checks, driving across town, babysitting on 2 hours' notice, and somewhere along the way, people stop seeing the hands that carry everything. They just see the table already set. I gave Karen and David the down payment for their house, $43,000 from the savings Richard and I built over decades. He would have wanted it, I told myself, and maybe he would have. But Richard also would have wanted to sit at their Thanksgiving table. He would have wanted his grandchildren to know the taste of his wife's stuffing. He would have wanted to matter. David's parents gave them a set of monogrammed towels. 2 years ago, I overheard Karen on the phone during one of my visits. I was in the hallway, heading to the bathroom, and her voice carried from the kitchen in that careless way voices do when people forget walls are thin. She means well, Karen said. She's just a lot sometimes. You know how she is with the old recipes and the holiday stuff. David's mom keeps things simple, elegant. Mom's more homestead. She laughed. Whoever was on the other end laughed too. I stood in that hallway for a long time. Then I flushed the toilet so she'd think I hadn't heard and walked back into the living room with a smile that felt like plaster. I never mentioned it. I told myself it didn't matter. That daughters grow up and find their own style. That being homestead wasn't an insult. But it sat in my chest like a stone. And every holiday since, I felt its weight. The day before Thanksgiving, I woke up early and made my decision. I cooked everything. All of it. The turkey went into the oven at 5 a.m. I made the cranberry sauce, the casserole, the stuffing, the rolls, the pumpkin pie with the hand-crimped crust. I worked for 9 hours straight. My back ached, my knees ached, my hands ached. But I didn't stop. When it was done, I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by food that could have fed a family of 10, and I felt something crack open inside me. Not sadness, something sharper. Recognition. I was cooking for ghosts. I covered everything in foil and plastic wrap. I stacked the containers neatly, and then I sat at the table and didn't eat any of it. That evening, I walked outside. The air was cold, the kind of November cold that bites your lungs and makes your eyes water. 2 houses down, the lights were on at Helen's place. Helen and her daughter Rosa had moved in last spring. Rosa was 9, quiet, with big brown eyes and a habit of drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, even when it was too cold for it. Helen worked nights at the hospital. I'd brought them soup once when Rosa had the flu, and Helen had hugged me like I was someone she'd been waiting for. I knocked on their door, carrying the entire Thanksgiving dinner. Helen opened it, confused. "Margaret? What on earth?" "I cooked too much," I said. "Way too much. And I thought maybe you and Rosa might want a real Thanksgiving dinner." Her eyes changed. Not pity, something else entirely. Understanding, maybe. the kind that doesn't need an explanation. "Come in," she said. "Please." Rosa was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, drawing a turkey with too many feathers. She looked up, and her face split into a grin. "Mrs. Margaret, did you bring pie?" "Pumpkin," I said, "with the good crust." We set up their small table together. Helen didn't have china, just mismatched plates from Goodwill and plastic cups with cartoon characters. The stuffing went into a mixing bowl. The cranberry sauce sat in a coffee mug. The turkey barely fit on the counter. It was the most beautiful Thanksgiving table I'd seen in years. We ate slowly. Rosa talked about school, about her teacher who wore funny socks, about a squirrel she'd named Gerald who lived in their backyard tree. Helen told me about nursing school, about how hard it was to be alone in a new city, about how Rosa sometimes asked for her dad and she never knew what to say. I told them about Richard, about the garden, about the turkey he carved every year with the same dull knife because he said it had character. Rosa laughed so hard at that. Milk came out of her nose. And for the first time in 4 Thanksgivings, I heard the sound of joy in a room where I was actually sitting down. When I walked home that night, the containers empty, the cold air sharp against my cheeks, I felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness exactly. Clarity, like fog lifting from a road I'd been walking blind. Karen didn't call on Thanksgiving. Not in the morning, not during dinner, not at night. I checked my phone once, around 8 p.m., then put it face down on the nightstand. She didn't call the day after, either, or the day after that. On Saturday, I went to the bank. First Federal, the same branch Richard and I had used for 40 years. A young man named Marcus helped me. He had kind eyes and a firm handshake. "I'd like to make some changes to my accounts," I said. "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. What did you have in mind?" "My daughter, Karen Whitfield Chen, is listed as the beneficiary on my savings account and has power of attorney on my secondary checking account. I'd like to remove both." Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He typed. He printed forms. I signed them with steady hands. Then I asked him one more thing. "I'd like to set up an education fund for a child named Rosa Delgado. She's 9, lives on Maple Street." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded and started typing again. When I left the bank, the sun was low and the parking lot was nearly empty. I sat in my car for a few minutes, hands on the steering wheel, not driving anywhere. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was just still, in the way you're still, after putting down something very heavy that you've carried for a very long time. Karen found out the following Thursday. She called the family attorney about estate planning, as she did every December. She liked to stay ahead of things, she said. What she meant was she liked to know exactly what was coming to her. The attorney told her the changes were made. She called me within the hour. "Mom, what's going on with the accounts?" "I was in the garden, clearing dead leaves from Richard's rose bushes." "What do you mean?" Brian said. "You removed me from your beneficiary list and revoked the power of attorney." "Mom, what is this?" "It's exactly what it sounds like, Karen." Silence. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, the way she breathed when she was trying not to lose her temper. "Is this about Thanksgiving?" "Because I told you, David's parents wanted to host." "It wasn't personal." "It's been 4 years, Karen." "What?" 4 years since I sat at my own Thanksgiving table with my own family. 4 years since anyone ate my cranberry sauce or asked for seconds of my stuffing. 4 years since Lily made place cards or Sam snuck marshmallows off the casserole. "Mom, that's not fair. You know how complicated the holidays are." "I know how complicated they are for everyone except me, because for me, they've been very simple. I cook, I wait, nobody comes." She went quiet. Then, carefully, "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know. That's almost worse. If you'd meant to, at least I'd know you thought about me." She didn't have an answer for that. I told her I loved her, because I did. And I hung up. That night, David called. His voice was soft, cautious, the way people talk when they've been coached. "Margaret, Karen's pretty upset. I think there might have been a misunderstanding. David, I said, I gave you $43,000 for your house. I've babysat your children more nights than I can count. I drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to bring soup when Lily had strep. I spent my 65th birthday alone because Karen forgot, and I never said a word. There's no misunderstanding. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, quietly, I didn't know about the birthday. No, I said. You didn't. He apologized. I thanked him. We hung up. The next morning, a text from Lily. My granddaughter, 12 years old enough to have her own phone, young enough to still be honest. Grandma, Mom is crying. Are you mad at us? I miss your pie. I stared at that message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to write back. I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. I could never be mad at you. I miss you so much. It feels like a bruise that won't heal. I miss watching you set the table and pretending you didn't care about the place cards. I miss Sam's sticky fingers and your laugh when Grandpa Richard's pie story gets told for the 100th time. I miss being someone's Thanksgiving, but I didn't write any of that. Instead, I typed, I love you, Lily. I'm not mad. I'll always have pie for you. She sent back a heart emoji. One small red heart on a white screen. I pressed the phone to my chest and held it there. December came slowly, the way it does when you're paying attention. I didn't put up a tree, not because I was sad, but because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to decorate for people who wouldn't see it. Instead, I put a single candle in the front window, the way my mother used to when I was a girl in Vermont. She said a candle meant the house was alive, that someone inside was keeping watch. Helen brought Rosa over the first Saturday in December. Rosa had a drawing she'd made at school, a portrait of me with enormous glasses and a pie floating next to my head. At the bottom, in her careful handwriting, she'd written, Mrs. Margaret makes everything feel like home. I put it on the refrigerator next to a grocery list and a faded photo of Richard. It fit perfectly. We started a new routine. Saturday afternoons, Rosa would come over and I'd teach her to bake. We started with sugar cookies because the dough forgives mistakes. She was messy and enthusiastic, flour in her hair, butter on her elbows, and she asked questions nonstop. Why does butter have to be cold? Why do we sift the flour? What happens if you forget the eggs? Then it's not a cookie, I told her. It's a cracker with ambition. She giggled until she hiccuped. Helen would sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, studying her nursing textbooks while Rosa and I rolled out dough. Sometimes she'd look up and just watch us, a small smile on her face, the kind of smile that says more than conversation ever could. One Saturday, after Rosa had gone home with a tin of snickerdoodles and a smudge of frosting on her nose, Helen lingered at the door. Margaret, she said, I want you to know something. When we moved here, I didn't think we'd find anyone. Rosa's dad left when she was 4. My family's in another state. I was just trying to survive. She paused. You didn't just give us food. You gave us a place to belong. I nodded because words would have broken the moment. She squeezed my hand and left. I stood in the doorway for a while after that, watching the street. A neighbor was stringing lights on his porch. A dog barked somewhere. The air smelled like chimney smoke and the last stubborn leaves of autumn. I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a phone call, not for an invitation, not for someone to tell me I mattered. I was just standing there, present, whole, accounted for. Karen came on December 23rd, unannounced. I saw her car pull into the driveway from the living room window, and I watched her sit in the driver's seat for a full 3 minutes before she got out. She knocked, even though she had a key. That told me something. I opened the door. She was holding a pie from the bakery downtown, the kind that comes in a cardboard box with a clear window on top, store-bought. She held it like an offering. Hi, Mom. Hi, Karen. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She walked into the living room and looked around, noticing the bare spot where the tree usually stood, the single candle in the window, the quiet. You didn't decorate, she said. I didn't need to. She set the pie on the coffee table and sat on the sofa. I sat in my chair across from her. We looked at each other like two people who had run out of small talk and were now left with only the truth. Mom, I'm sorry. I know. No, I mean really sorry. Not the kind where I say it and we move on and everything goes back to how it was. I mean the kind where I've been up at night thinking about what you said, about 4 years, about the birthday. She pressed her palms together. Her eyes were red. David told me you drove 2 hours in a snowstorm for Lily's strep. I didn't even remember that. He did. And when he said it, I felt sick. Because I couldn't remember the last time I drove to you for anything. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, but because she needed to say it all before I said anything. I've been so worried about fitting in with David's family, about keeping up with Patricia and her perfect house and her perfect table, that I forgot who taught me how to set a table in the first place. I forgot who stayed up until midnight sewing my Halloween costumes. Who showed up to every school play, even the terrible ones. Who held me when Dad died and didn't let go for 3 hours. Her voice cracked. You never asked for anything, Mom. That's what kills me. You never demanded. You just kept giving, and I just kept taking, and I told myself that was normal because you never complained. I shouldn't have had to complain, Karen. I know. We sat in silence. The candle flickered in the window. I'm not going to pretend everything is fixed, I said. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not going to keep filling a table for people who don't come to dinner. I've spent 4 years cooking for ghosts. I'm done. She flinched at that word. Ghosts. What do you need from me? She asked. I thought about it. Not the answer I'd rehearsed in my head, but the real one. I need you to show up. Not because I cooked, not because it's convenient, not because David's parents are busy. I need you to show up because you want to, because your children deserve to know what their grandmother's kitchen smells like, because I deserve to sit at my own table and look across at the people I love. She nodded, tears running now, but she didn't wipe them. And I need you to understand that if you don't, I'll be all right. I've already found people who show up. A woman named Helen and a little girl named Rosa, who thinks I make everything feel like home. I'm not alone, Karen. I haven't been for a while, but I'd like to not have to choose between the family I found and the family I raised. She stood up, crossed the room, and sat on the arm of my chair. She put her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, when the world was too loud and I was the only quiet place she knew. I'm going to be better, Mom. I believe you'll try. She stayed for 2 hours. We didn't eat the bakery pie. Instead, I made tea, and we sat in the kitchen, and she asked me about Helen and Rosa. She listened. Really listened. Not the polite kind where her eyes drifted to her phone. When she left, she hugged me at the door, long and tight. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. Okay. I mean it. I know you do. I watched her drive away, taillights fading into the winter dark. Then I closed the door and stood in my hallway, the house settling around me in its familiar creaks and sighs. On the kitchen counter sat Rosa's drawing, still pinned to the fridge. Next to it, Richard smiled at me from his faded photograph. The candle burned steady in the window. I hadn't gotten everything I wanted. Karen hadn't undone 4 years with one visit. The bank accounts stayed as they were. The education fund for Rosa was already growing. Some things, once changed, shouldn't change back. But I had gotten something I didn't know I needed. Not an apology. Not really. Something smaller and truer. A beginning. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat in Richard's chair, the one nobody else ever sat in, and rested. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of me, full of choices I finally made, full of candles I lit for myself, full of dough rising on the counter and drawings on the fridge and the memory of a little girl who said I made everything feel like home. You don't need an invitation to matter. You don't need a seat at someone else's table to be nourished. You don't need your children's permission to stop breaking yourself into pieces so they can take what they want and leave the rest. You are the home. You are the light. You are the table. And if they come back, you welcome them not because you're desperate, but because you're whole. And if they don't, you sit down anyway. You eat the food you made, you light the candle, and you stay warm. Because that's what Margaret Whitfield learned at 67, in a kitchen that smelled like sage and memory. That love is not a performance, that giving is not a transaction, that sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is stop waiting and start living, and that a 9-year-old girl with flour in her hair and a drawing of a pie can save you faster than any apology ever could.